This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London. All of our podcasts are available from our website, www.sas.ac.uk.
I'm of course also very happy to see everybody here. I'm kind of quite thrilled to see such a large audience. Warm welcome to everybody, and my special thanks of course to Peter for organizing, for having this idea to organize this conference, which theoretically will bring Warburg and Benjamin together in the institute that bears Warburg's name and has grown out of its own very own institution, the Kulturwissenschaftliche Bibliothek Warburg in Hamburg. As a matter of fact, and Peter has already mentioned it, this is the very first conference dedicated to Warburg's works in this building, and has practically, I've seen almost everybody already, brought together a group of very distinguished scholars who will present and discuss their work on Warburg and Benjamin with us today and tomorrow. And many of them have come from far. I'm particularly kind of grateful to them, but some have also come from London to this institute, and that is very kind of a very nice group, the idea of that. Why Warburg and Benjamin? We as organizers are by no means the first to notice and address the striking affinities in both scholars' preoccupations and concerns, despite their distance of a generation in age, the difference of their respective disciplines, and the lack, almost at least, of a direct influence on each other. The analogies in the originality of their thought and concurrent difference from contemporaries, which Walter Benjamin himself had noticed and which prompted him to seek, without success, a closer contact with Warburg and his circle. Most striking, though, to me is both scholars' perception of their own mission as uncompleted, and of their last unfinished work as somewhat more important than themselves. Such analogies and affinities, however, have been explored widely, in particular in the past 10 to 15 years, and also by colleagues who are here today. Benjamin was no doubt rediscovered earlier than Warburg, at least in the wider scholarly community, and certainly in the English-speaking world. His works, many of them published during his lifetime, are better known, whereas Warburg's relatively slim and in part remotely published oeuvre was hardly available, or at least difficult to find, before it was reprinted in German in 1980, and it was only translated into English in 1999 in the thick Getty volume, which I'm sure everybody knows. And it might be true that Warburg is partially known because of or through Benjamin. It is certainly true that it remains difficult to glean Warburg's theoretical notions from his scarce published output, notions which he didn't consider ready for publication. The best way to get to know the theoretical Warburg is through the broad collections of unpublished papers, partly extremely sketchy notes and jottings which we keep in the archive of this institute, at times condensed to a single keyword that stands for an entire chapter of the major book he was going to write. It does therefore remain difficult to grasp his thought when one is confronted with his idiosyncratic, highly condensed language, dominated by nouns of which quite a few are neologisms. Yet it is certainly a misunderstanding to think, and I hope this will probably also be the result of this conference, it is certainly a misunderstanding to think that he conceived his works, in particular the Memosuna Atlas, of which I've chosen a few panels in large reproduction, purely as constellations of images which would speak for themselves without the comment of its creator. Gertrude Bing, his one-time closest collaborator, was convinced that Warburg's language was the key to his so-called general ideas, the expression he used as an allusion to his cultural theoretical notions. The attempt, she writes, and I quote, to analyze the process how he, Warburg, coins his expressions, the Ausdrucksbildung, promises an opportunity to observe his thought in statu nascendi et maturescendi. End of quote. Warburg's and Benjamin's thoughts thus seem to come very close to each other when we observe the methodological role language played for them, the linguistic mimesis of the process of cognition, and how epistemology is reflected in the language as a medium to demonstrate, illustrate, and explicate a problem. In Warburg's case, the so-called problem or Problem, which commanded him throughout his life. I've thus chosen to close this short, very short introduction with a few impressions from the archives. That of Benjamin in the middle, the two large images in the middle, dispersed and to a large extent not surviving, and that of Warburg, one of the most complete surviving collections of an early 20th century intellectual. Inspired by the sciences, these diagrams, some explicitly dialectical, and I'm sorry I don't have the time to discuss them all in detail, dialectical in their nature, fascinated me in their similarities as they illustrate their analogies in the limits of the narrative both scholars seem to have encountered. And just one more word, just like really as an opening, that the three, and especially I think you can see the structures which are pretty analog. The three on the top and the three on the bottom are Warburg, and the two in the middle are Benjamin. And we will take up the theme of the ellipse certainly again later today. And that's why I want to stop and hand back over to Peter to introduce our first speaker.